In 2005, a man in Germany had part of his jawbone completely removed after a tumor. Surgeons rebuilt it using titanium mesh, stem cells, and his own tissue. And the bone regrew almost perfectly over the following months, as if the body had a blueprint ready to execute. Meanwhile, the tooth he lost years earlier from a bar fight? Still gone. No amount of healing, no matter how advanced the medicine, was ever going to bring that back on its own. That contrast sits at the center of a strange biological gap most people never think about until they lose a tooth and realize it simply isn't coming back the way a bruise or a broken bone would. Bone, one of the hardest and most structurally demanding materials in the human body, can rebuild itself after fractures, surgeries, even significant tissue loss from disease or trauma. Teeth, sitting just millimeters away in the same jaw, sharing blood supply from many of the same vessels, can't regenerate at all once the crown is damaged beyond the outer enamel layer. Two structures side by side, following completely different biological rules. And the reason why reveals something fundamental about how the body decides what gets to heal and what doesn't. The difference comes down to what each tissue actually is at the cellular level. Bone is a living, dynamic tissue, constantly broken down and rebuilt by two specialized types of cells working together in a coordinated cycle: osteoblasts, which build new bone matrix, and osteoclasts, which clear away old or damaged bone so it can be replaced. Even in a healthy adult with no injuries at all, a significant portion of the entire skeleton gets remodeled every single year through this ongoing background process, largely invisible and unnoticed. It's part of why bone density shifts with age, exercise, and diet. The skeleton is never truly finished being built. When a bone fractures, that same cellular machinery ramps up dramatically, laying down new bone matrix in stages until the structure is restored. Sometimes just as strong, or in certain cases even slightly stronger, than before the break. Enamel, the hard outer layer of a tooth, works on entirely different rules from the start. It's the hardest substance the human body produces, harder even than bone, engineered by evolution to withstand decades of grinding, biting, and chewing without wearing down to nothing. But that extreme hardness comes at a steep cost. Enamel contains no living cells at all, anywhere within its structure. It's produced by specialized cells called ameloblasts during tooth development, while the tooth is still forming beneath the gum line, long before it ever emerges into the mouth. Once that developmental process finishes, the ameloblasts responsible for producing enamel are lost completely. They don't relocate elsewhere in the body. They don't go dormant, waiting to be reactivated. They simply cease to exist as functional cells. There's no ongoing cellular activity left inside enamel, none whatsoever to repair or replace it if it's ever damaged. This creates what researchers sometimes describe as a genuine biological dead end, almost unique among human tissues. Unlike bone, which retains an active, self-renewing population of cells throughout a person's entire life specifically dedicated to maintenance, mature enamel is essentially inert from the moment it forms. More like a mineral deposit than living tissue, despite sitting inside a living mouth. Microscopic mineral loss on the surface can sometimes be partially offset through a process called remineralization, where minerals dissolved in saliva slowly get redeposited into microscopic pores and damaged areas. This is part of why fluoride, along with certain minerals in toothpaste, can genuinely help protect teeth over time. Fluoride specifically makes the redeposited mineral more resistant to future acid attacks from bacteria. But this process only works on extremely small-scale surface damage, the kind measured in micrometers. Once a cavity breaks through into the deeper dentin layer, or a tooth cracks, chips, or fractures significantly, there is no remaining biological mechanism capable of rebuilding what's missing. Dentin, the layer sitting just beneath the enamel and making up the bulk of a tooth's structure, does retain a limited repair capacity, considerably more than enamel, though still nowhere close to bone. This is because dentin is maintained by cells called odontoblasts, which survive throughout a person's life inside the tooth's soft inner pulp chamber, the same chamber housing the tooth's blood supply and nerve endings. When dentin is mildly irritated, from a shallow cavity that hasn't yet reached the pulp, or from ordinary wear over the years, Odontoblasts can respond by laying down a thin new layer of reparative dentin underneath the site of irritation. This partly seals off the vulnerable pulp chamber from further bacterial invasion, acting as a kind of internal defensive barrier. But this repair mechanism is slow, extremely limited in scope, and produces only a modest, localized patch rather than anything resembling the full-scale structural reconstruction bone is capable of after a serious fracture. It can protect the tooth's sensitive interior to some degree. It absolutely cannot restore lost structure on the outside surface, cannot rebuild a chipped corner, cannot fill in a hole from an untreated cavity. There's a compelling reason researchers believe this asymmetry likely evolved the way it did. Scientists who study dental evolution point out that enamel's extreme hardness and its complete lack of living cells are directly mechanically connected. Not a coincidence, but a fundamental trade-off baked into the material itself. The same rigid, densely packed crystalline mineral structure that makes enamel so remarkably resistant to the mechanical stress of chewing is precisely what makes it physically impossible to keep living cells alive anywhere within it. Living cells need access to blood vessels for oxygen and nutrients, need some degree of flexibility in their surrounding structure to survive. Bone, by contrast, needs to remain slightly flexible and genuinely porous throughout its structure specifically to support networks of blood vessels and the living maintenance cells responsible for its own repair. Which is exactly why bone can heal itself so effectively, but can never reach anywhere near the extreme surface hardness enamel achieves. You essentially cannot have both properties in the same tissue simultaneously. Some researchers studying this question have also pointed to fascinating trade-offs that show up across the wider animal kingdom. Species like sharks continuously regrow entire rows of teeth throughout their lives, cycling through many thousands of individual teeth, one after another, in a conveyor belt-like system. This works for sharks because their teeth are anchored to the jaw completely differently than mammalian teeth, loosely embedded in soft tissue rather than fused into bone sockets, allowing old teeth to simply fall out and be replaced wholesale by new ones waiting in rows behind them. Mammals, including humans, evolved toward a fundamentally different long-term strategy instead. A smaller, fixed number of highly specialized teeth, firmly anchored into bone sockets, built to last an entire lifetime through sheer durability rather than periodic wholesale replacement. That evolutionary trade-off may well have made evolving any kind of repair mechanism for enamel comparatively less advantageous over millions of years than simply making enamel as hard and damage-resistant as biologically possible from the very start. There's ongoing, genuinely active research into whether this biological limitation might eventually be overcome through artificial or medical intervention. Some research laboratories around the world have experimented with stimulating stem cells, either a patient's own or laboratory cultured, to try to regenerate simplified, enamel-like mineral structures under controlled conditions. There's also early-stage research into the more ambitious goal of regrowing entire replacement teeth from scratch using a person's own cells, essentially recreating the developmental process that originally built the tooth in childhood. Some of this research has shown promising results in animal models, hinting that the biological dead end might not be permanent forever, given enough scientific progress. But as of now, none of these experimental approaches have come anywhere close to producing anything resembling natural, functional enamel regeneration inside a living human mouth under real-world conditions. For the moment, at least, the biological reality remains exactly the same as it's been for all of human history. Crack a bone, and your body has an active, functioning blueprint ready to fix it, cell by cell, over the following weeks and months. Crack a tooth, and that blueprint simply doesn't exist, never did, and isn't likely to appear on its own anytime soon. Next time you're tempted to chew on ice, crunch down on a popcorn kernel the wrong way, or use your teeth to open a stubborn package, it might be worth remembering this asymmetry sitting quietly in your own mouth. Your jawbone could, in theory, bounce back from a fairly serious break or even reconstructive surgery. That tooth sitting right next to it only ever gets one shot. If this made you think twice about your next bite of ice, hit subscribe. There are plenty more strange questions waiting for answers.